if you're honest with yourself, it doesn't take long to realize that most of your life is not actually spent really living in the present experience. Instead, your life is spent living in thoughts, living in stories, living in constructs about experience. You're not really attuned to your experience. You're not very present with it. You're not really in your body. You're not in your senses. You're not really even fully engaged in your experience. When you're looking at your experience, you're still stuck in thought. You're not fully involved with the visual field. You're just kind of lost in your stories about life. You're stuck in your mind a lot. And all of that stuff is all mental construct. It's narratives, it's stories. And before we know it, we go through our life year after year after year, and we are subtly missing it. And our mind doesn't ever kind of wake us up and it's like, hey, you're missing your life. You're not really attuned to your experience unless you train it to recognize that. Instead, you kind of just keep going year by year, missing life, missing out on the beautiful details of the present experience, not really being able to simply enjoy existing in the present moment. And I want to tell you a quick story about when I first started practicing meditation. So the first time I did that was about 7 years ago, and I couldn't actually sit there for 30 seconds. I very easily got bored, I was mad, I was kind of restless, and it clicked in that moment that if I can't simply sit in my room and just enjoy life, enjoy this experience as it is, if I can't just sit here and look at this wall in this room that I'm in and just enjoy my experience, I actually have a huge problem. Nothing is ever going to solve this problem for me. Nothing is ever going to come into my life and actually make me feel fulfilled if I don't have the capacity to be present with life and fully experience it. Instead, I'm always going to be rejecting the present. I'm always going to be avoiding it. Always going to be acting out of fear, essentially. I'm going to be programming my mind to be habitually acting out of survival impulses, past conditioning, and fear. I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to make meaningful change. I won't self-actualize. I won't realize the most magnificent aspects of human life. I'll fail to recognize them, all because I simply can't enjoy the experience that I'm having right now as it is without needing to alter it, change it, add to it, subtract from it. I can't just sit with it and meet it as it is. I lack acceptance. I'm always struggling. I'm manipulating it. I'm fighting it. So this was really understood just kind of right off the bat, that this is a big problem. I have to fix this. And if I do not, I'm screwed. So I want to talk about what it actually means to be present in this video, why this matters, and start sharing with you some advanced insights about this kind of stuff. Because typically when we hear about it, we hear some sort of corny meditation stuff like, yeah, just being the present. But I want to go deeper than that in this video. I don't want it to stay at some surface level. I'm not really interested in that. Although, yes, it's nice. I want it to go far past that, to start building the ground, building the path to go far beyond that. So presence is fully experiencing this present moment without judgment, distraction, or clinging on to thoughts or feelings. It's essentially just about allowing the experience to be as it is, being fully aware of it, and not clinging on to anything, not grasping on to anything, not rejecting anything, fully allowing what is happening to happen and then pass away, fully allowing what is happening to arise and then pass away. So we got to make this distinction between presence and then mindlessness, so we get that contrast in experience. So presence involves awareness and engagement with experience, and this word engagement is quite difficult to actually, there's some nuance to this one. So really what I mean here is the ability to watch experience closely and not need to manipulate it, but you're fully immersed in your experience. Whereas mindlessness is kind of just zoning out, being lost in thought, acting out of past conditioning, acting out of fear, acting out of just only survival instincts, not ever going beyond that. So now we kind of have this clearer picture of the two different paths that we can take in life. So why is this even important? There's a lot of unnecessary suffering that you experience. If you're a human, you can easily recognize that there's a lot of suffering that you experience that you actually create. And if you're, again, very honest with yourself, and honesty is kind of the basis of this kind of work, if you're very honest with yourself, you're creating it. It's self-inflicted, but you don't even know how you're doing it. A lot of the suffering you experience is something that you are doing to yourself totally unconsciously and habitually. It's programmed into your mind and it just repeats itself. It's a pattern, it's a form of conditioning. So much of our suffering comes from simply resisting the present moment or replaying old stories. And when you're actually able to be present, it starts to anchor you into actual direct experience, which is just fluid, changing energy that's just morphing and constantly moving. There's no permanence to be found whatsoever. It's this just flow of sensation, sight, sound, etc. And when you're present, you're able to just allow life to move as it wants to, rather than always imposing yourself upon it, resisting it, pushing it away, pulling on other things, manipulating it, playing this sort of underlying game with life. Instead, you learn how to just let your experience move in a natural and organic way, which automatically starts to reduce a tremendous amount of suffering. Because when you're experiencing something, to resist it, to force anything to be other than what it is you exerting a lot of energy into fighting against experience. It's coming from a place already of fear. It's coming from a place of irritation. The place from where that arises is already setting you up for failure. So the present is the only place where life happens. Everything else exists only as mental constructs. And by being present, you actually start to see that. You start to see these subtle tricks that your mind plays on you. Your mind creates this sort of matrix of reality, this conceptual matrix, and you buy into it for survival purposes, to help you navigate life, to manipulate it to get things that you want in order to survive. And as you become more present, you can kind of watch this stuff and start to just observe it, start to detach from it, start to actually learn to not always buy into everything that your mind tells you, to just be aware of the mind rather than always identified with it. And this is a huge shift in perspective. This starts to pull you out of the ego and moves you into pure consciousness, the pure witness of experience. So this, over time, cultivates a very natural sense of peace and clarity. In presence, you're no longer always caught in mental chatter. You're not always caught in all these sort of unnecessary delusions that you actually cling on to out of fear. All these sort of habitual patterns that just create suffering. You're able to just watch them and actually start to let go of them, process your feelings, move into the flowing energy of the moment, the sensations of the moment, the felt experience of the moment, rather than always being caught up in a thought about the experience, always being caught up in story, construct, narrative, etc. And there's a place for thinking, there's a place for using thought, but nowadays, especially in Western culture, we're totally lost in thought. We are completely absorbed in it. I believe Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, when he was asked what he thinks about Western culture, his response was lost in thought, which I really liked. Humans around the world are very lost in thought in general, but I think Western culture is a very sort of funny example, and it holds a lot of global influence, so that's why I'm going to reference it particularly. So on to some of this more advanced stuff that I said that I was going to mention. So presence isn't just some sort of like new agey hippy-dippy thing, but it's an actual inquiry into the very nature of self, reality, mind, consciousness, things like this. Quite advanced stuff, actually. The Buddha when he realized enlightenment wasn't just like, it's not just this sort of like bullshit thing, but it was and his meditation practice was an actual method for inquiring into the nature of reality. And realizing enlightenment is just simply realizing what is true about the nature of self and this experience. It's just what is actually true about this right here. What actually is this? Have you ever wondered, what is any of this? What is the totality of this? What actually is experience? What is an experience made out of? So presence is an actual practice for inquiring into experience, kind of like a scientist who is running experiments and maybe doing some kind of method of inquiry into, let's say, biology or a particular organism or something like that, where you have that sort of curious mind that's just trying to discover what's true about something. Works in the same way with this. So when you actually practice presence, you observe not just your thoughts, but the awareness behind them. So you notice how thoughts arise and pass, but you, the observer, remain constant. You recognize that your psychological emotional system starts to play this trick on you. It's been doing this ever since you were around age 2. That you are this separate self. You're this separately independent, separately existing, independent entity, and this is just what you are. You're just like this human meat sack, and that's just all that's going on here. But this ends up actually being quite a massive delusion. This distinction between self versus other, this category of self versus other, ends up simply just being a mental construct. It's something that our minds invent in order to create a strong sense of self, so that we can manipulate reality in order to get what we need to survive. That distinction between self and other doesn't exist on an existential level. It exists purely on a mental level, only on a conceptual level. And there's value in it, there's use in it, especially for navigating the human experience, but it's not existentially the case. So presence is all about uncovering the actual essence of being. Presence reveals that beneath the mind's noise, there's a still, spacious essence. This essence is not defined by roles, labels, or achievements. It starts to dissolve the ego's illusions, essentially. So the ego thrives on attachment, clinging on to experience, clinging on to thoughts, beliefs, past and future, clinging on to a self, clinging on to a particular state of being. Like I said, experience itself is this constantly changing flow of energy. But in your body right now, you can actually detect that there's tensions in certain areas, there's forms of resistance, there's places that are kind of numb, maybe dull, and there's all these sort of mechanisms for pushing out this constantly changing aspect of experience. And regardless it's still happening, it's just we're kind of fighting against it. And the ego thrives on this fight against experience. This is where the ego is really born. The ego is born out of that sort of sense of struggle against experience. And this presence allows you to just simply let some of these unnecessary attachments fade, allowing you to experience life as it is, free of all filters. When you're able to just watch yourself struggle or resist or fight, this is a curative phenomenon. Awareness alone is healing. So the second you can actually just fully apply attention to something and just observe it, it starts to dismantle the very mechanism over time that is actually keeping you stuck in this pattern of unnecessary suffering. And we're looking at something that's quite complex here. I don't want to overcomplicate this, but I also don't want to oversimplify it. You have to be very sincere when it comes to this kind of stuff. I think that's a very core element of this kind of work. Very honest, very sincere, not looking to just like shortcut something to experience a particular state, but getting actually curious about how your mind works and what it is and what are you? Who are you? What are you existentially? So there's a deeper sense of freedom that comes as someone becomes more present because you're letting go of resistance, you're seeing through illusions, you're processing emotions in real time, which wasn't something that you most likely did, you were probably more avoidant of them rather than in a state of connection to yourself emotionally in a very sort of felt way. You probably weren't very present in your body. And through this kind of stuff, basically letting go of resistance, seeing through illusions that your mind constructs, and actually being in the felt experience, being in your body, processing emotions, sensing into your body, and feeling yourself as a subject within your body, really being grounded in it and feeling safe in there, you actually just naturally start to experience more joy and gratitude. It occurs just totally naturally. It becomes a more continuous way of being. It becomes more stable rather than continuously fluctuating. Your mood simply gets higher. Rather than always being stuck in thoughts, you can actually kind of feel kind of numb from experience. Our thoughts are actually subtly numbing us from our actual experience. When you begin to watch them for so long, you can actually see that, yeah, my thoughts are like always trying to pull me to some distraction or away from my experience. They're pulling me out of my body continuously. It's just like this sort of phantom that's kind of controlling us. So I want to talk about some practical steps to cultivate presence. How do you start to really bring this into your daily life? Mindfulness meditation is a great way. I've talked about it in almost every one of my videos. Focusing on your breath, bodily sensations, and your senses, stuff like this. Starting slow. For a lot of you, you probably don't actually have a practice yet, and if you do, it probably hasn't gotten somewhat advanced yet. And I don't want you to kind of overcomplicate the word advanced, like you gotta do some kind of strange stuff, but there's just some subtle stuff that most of you probably aren't aware yet because you just kind of haven't really practiced it. So just setting up that initial meditation practice is a good way for just kind of paving the way forward, most likely from where a lot of you are currently at. So another core point is just noticing thoughts arising and passing. Being able to just watch thoughts arise and pass rather than always being identified with them, controlled by them. Just having this sort of meta awareness that's able to just observe thoughts. So the thought arises and it passes. It arises and it passes rather than clinging onto it, grasping onto it, etc. Same thing with feelings, allowing feelings to move rather than always tensing and constricting into them. Another core point is just embracing stillness and silence and actually creating that in your everyday life. So having a structured time to actually just experience meditation, a structured time to embrace stillness, silence, totally dedicated to doing this. And my last point for kind of beginning to build this into your life in a more practical way is to use triggers and just inquire into some of the things that you're actually doing. Use certain triggers to like provoke an inquiry. Maybe like eating, you just start to eat mindfully. Or you just kind of use some kind of daily chore in your life, like washing the dishes, for example, to just serve as a reminder for coming into contact with the sensations in your hands as you wash the dishes, or the thoughts that you're arising, or your overall state. Using certain things in your life, your responsibilities that you tend to every day, to kind of snap you into a more aware state rather than always remaining in the autopilot. So I want you to just kind of notice how much you're actually not in your experience. As a sort of call to action in this video, I want you to just start noticing how little attention you're actually giving to what is present in the experience or your body versus just being lost in thoughts. Even as you look with your eyes open, when you're lost in thoughts, you're not very engaged with the visual field. You're not actually really looking at what's going on. It looks like you are. You can really convince yourself that you are, but you're really not. You're not actually present to what is going on. You're not very aware of like the subtlety in the visual field. You're kind of just aware of maybe like if there's a threat in front of you or if there's not. You're kind of just, again, an autopilot. You're just kind of acting out of conditioning rather than actually being connected to experience. There's a big difference. Take a moment right now to just become aware of your visual field and the subtlety and the shapes and the colors that are actually in the visual field, right? And just kind of scanning the visual field, right? And then in 5 minutes, when you're lost in thought again, notice the difference. Notice that you're kind of lost again. You're not actually engaged in what's happening. Once again, it's like you're in like a daze. It's like you're sleepwalking through life and you're lucky enough to not bump into anything. That's it for this video. If you're interested in working with me, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.